When people hear about these Epstein files, a lot of people expect some shocking new revelations from a legal standpoint. What do you think these documents are actually expected to show?
I think a lot of these documents are going to show more of the similar material that we've seen so far. By that, what I mean is you're going to see a lot of legal documents. You're going to see a lot of interview material. You're going to see photographs of Epstein with a lot of famous individuals. But what's important to understand is merely being photographed with Epstein doesn't necessarily mean someone's done something wrong. What's going to be really important to look for is going to be the videotape material from the surveillance cameras inside of his home. That's going to show certain, we'll call them incidents that may have occurred inside of Epstein's mansions in New York, in Palm Beach, and also in the island.
If we see faces, names, or allegations surface, does this reopen the door for criminal investigations, or are prosecutors limited by the statute of limitations?
Well, there are certain crimes that have no statute of limitations. So there are certain things that I'm sure that prosecutors were looking for when they were trying to make a determination on whether to file charges. But what I think is important to look at in these documents is really for the public to see who's in them and what they were doing, and for the public to judge whether or not they want these individuals to continue to remain in positions of power, in whether it be government or corporations or, any type of institution.
What about failures by institutions of law enforcement? Even if no charges are filed, will this expose some of the failures?
Well, I think we've already seen numerous failures over the last 18 years in the prosecution of Epstein, or the failures to properly prosecute Epstein. So, I think that these documents will merely solidify, for history purposes, the failures on both the state and federal level, and how the victims were really failed by this process.
I know you've represented many of the victims. How does this impact them?
Well, there's many different types of victims. There are victims that want to speak out. There are victims that have gone public and said that this information should be public. And then there are other victims who remain private and don't really want to hear anything about Jeffrey Epstein. So I think it crosses many different types of victims. I think that the importance of this information is significant for the general public, so that hopefully we can hold our leaders accountable, both in law enforcement, in the Department of Justice, and potentially in positions of power that they currently sit in.
This is kind of a loaded question, but do you think that this is going to quench the public's desire to see these documents? There's been so much said on social media and such. Is this going to provide them with some evidence and some answers finally?
Unfortunately, no. I think that a lot of these documents are going to just create additional questions that should be asked of very powerful individuals. Why were you socializing with Jeffrey Epstein, for example, after 2008, when he was convicted of inappropriate conduct with minors? But in addition to that, unfortunately, the victims and myself, frankly, have no faith that the federal government is going to be 100% complete with this disclosure.
With that said, many of the files that we've seen so far, is anything new here? Are we looking at court records that were already previously sealed and now being unsealed?
Well, you're asking me to comment on 300,000 pages of documents that were just released literally minutes ago. So it'll take me time to go through them, just like all the news agencies, to see if there really is anything new here. But what I can tell you is the photographs that have been released are definitely new. And the photographs really do tell a story about who was socializing with Jeffrey Epstein around the time that they should not, frankly, have been socializing with a man like that. But it also shows you that these young girls, who some of which were 14 and 15 years old at the time, were properly intimidated by the connections that Epstein had. And when he threatened them about, do you know who I am and do you know who my friends are? He was actually telling them the truth. He had very powerful individuals that he was friends with.
Talk a little bit about the Palm Beach County case. Obviously, that sweetheart deal. Is there any revelations do you anticipate that are going to shed light on how that deal was made?
I certainly hope that the new documents are going to shed light on the deal, the sweetheart deal that he received here in Palm Beach County. Hopefully, a lot of the prosecutorial records and investigative memos will come forward, as well as hopefully some email communications within the Department of Justice as to why they made such an awful deal, why they entered into this kind of broad immunity for not just Jeffrey Epstein, but also co-conspirators that we know were involved in this. And unfortunately, what we're going to seriously see is the massive failures by our own Palm Beach State Attorney's Office and Barry Krischer's office in really dropping the ball and failing to prosecute this predator.
I've kind of dabbled and just looked at some of the cursory stuff, but I mean, as you said, there's just so much data there. Help me out here as a journalist. I'm going to be looking at the state versus Epstein, correct? This would have been the case, the original case. Is that where I want to be digging tonight, trying to find a local angle?
I think that the state v. Epstein is really the local potential prosecution of this matter, but the federal government case, the United States of America versus Epstein, is going to be where the wealth of documents really lie. That'll contain all the FBI interview documents, that'll contain all of the investigative memos, that'll probably contain most of the material, because what happened is that when the state failed to prosecute him as they should have, then the federal government stepped in, and the victims were promised that the federal government was going to actually take this and prosecute it. And then they entered into this awful deal. So they took all the evidence from the state. So that's really where you need to look, is in the federal government materials.
So it's possible that the federal investigation got to the bottom of how that sweetheart deal was made, and Barry Krischer's office and all that. All right.
Yeah,
Good. That's
that
good
would be my
advice.
hope.
I appreciate your legal help on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's really where I would start looking. That, and I would look for the FBI investigative memos. Every time they interview a victim, they're required to generate an investigative memo. So there'll be an individual memo regarding the investigation and interviews with all of the victims that they did interviews with. So that's going to be huge, because there were hundreds.